Independent National Electoral Commission's preparations for the forthcoming general elections have, to a reasonable extent, been hindered by factors beyond the control of the election management body. For instance, there are still pockets of violence being visited on the Commission's facilities all across Nigeria and by all manners of dissidents and non-state actors. But at the moment, there is a brewing controversy in the polity over Section 65 of the new Electoral Act, which empowers the INEC's returning officer to declare a candidate duly returned, while at the same time retaining the power to review his or her decision. For a bit of focus on this, we are now being joined by Arise analyst Frank Tietie. Good afternoon. Great to have you on the show with us.
Good afternoon, and my pleasure.
All right. Now, this Section 65 of the Electoral Act allowing INEC officers to return a candidate and et cetera, what could be the obvious pitfalls of this situation?
Well, that is if we expect a pitfall, but there is supposed to be a reason for empowering an official of INEC, in this case a returning officer appointed by INEC, to wield such immense discretionary power. There is a reason to that effect. Laws and the implementation and their implementations can actually amount to nothing if you power of discretion is not given to the human beings, the personalities, the officials who are actually saddled with the responsibility of implementing it. In this case, there is wisdom in that provision, to the extent that whenever there is a dispute as to whether a ballot paper has been marked or it has been rejected, or the certain scores have been declared, or a particular candidate has been returned as the winner of an election, when there is a dispute at the point of the electoral process, at the point of the election, the decision of the returning officer in that case shall be final. But in the real sense of it, this decision is not final, because the provision is complete in itself by saying such a decision, however final it may be, for that temporary purpose, can also be reviewed if the Independent National Electoral Commission gets a report that such a declaration, such a decision by the returning officer was made under compulsion, for example, under duress or under other extraneous reasons. Now, it doesn't even end there. The provision goes further to say, even when INEC has reviewed that decision within 7 days, according to the provision, the courts or the election tribunal can also further make a review of whatever decision that has been made by the returning officer. So that decision by the returning officer isn't final, even though the provision makes such a declaration. It is actually subjected to review. Now, discretion at all points in law must be exercised according to laid down provisions of the law, or whether regulations in the case of INEC. So discretions are not exercised in vacuum. So in a fair sense, I think it's not proper to proceed that something is wrong with that provision, except we are just trying to cry wolf the way, and the polity doesn't deserve that now. We must appreciate something, and this is very important. Now, the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, to which Nigeria is a major signatory, does not in any way allow, particularly Article 2, does not allow the amendment, the revision of electoral laws and regulations 6 months to an election. We are talking about barely 35 days to election. We can't be contemplating any fanciful review of the Electoral Act. It is the way it is that has been passed. We have a responsibility. The Independent National Electoral Commission has a responsibility to ensure that the elections are conducted within the precincts of the standards created by the Constitution and the Electoral Act of 2022.
Now, Mr. Frank, in a society where corruption thrives, don't you think unscrupulous politicians can exploit this Section 65 of the Electoral Act? And I'd also like to point out the fact that some people actually do have doubts in the ability of the judiciary, to actually give them justice when they go before them. So don't you think unscrupulous politicians can take advantage of this section?
Yes, indeed, you are correct. You are very correct. But we cannot afford to make the exception the norm. Of course, you will always have bad elements in every system, whether it's the judiciary or INEC. In the case of INEC, Professor Peter Ogban, a professor of soil science, mind you, a professor of a university professor is somewhat that is presumed to have impeccable character and high integrity. These are the sort of quality of persons that are appointed as returning officers. Expectedly, these are persons who should live above board. But in the case of Peter Ogban, in the particular case of Akwa Ibom State, Senatorial District in Akwa Ibom State, involving the former minister of the Niger Delta, Godswill Akpabio, the man compromised his conscience, compromised the law, compromised his sacred trust and duty imposed on him by INEC. And INEC, under the then resident electoral commissioner, Mike Igini, did not spare anything to ensure that he was sent to prison. So your question and your comment, your observation is absolutely correct. You will find elements who would always want to sabotage standards. But you see, there will be confusion, there will be disaster when the system does not have a way of, tracking such persons, preventing them from causing mayhem to the electoral system. So the case of Ogban is a good example. He was sent to prison. It didn't matter whether he was a professor, a university professor, or he was just supposedly an ad hoc staff of INEC. But he was well paid. He was given all the paraphernalia of someone in authority to conduct that election. But he ended up cooking figures and in favor of a particular candidate, and he paid the price for it. Yes, indeed. Whether we like it or not, there is no alternative to the judiciary. So there may be disgruntled persons complaining that judges take bribes or whatever it may be. Yes, these are the realities that we face concerning justice delivery in our country. However, predominantly, without the courts, we will not enjoy any iota of stability that we have today in our country. The judiciary, many of our judges, majority of the judges in the Nigerian judiciary actually deliver justice with a sense of independence and impartiality. Yes, it will be a problem if those judges that have compromised, that have collected bribes, are actually not brought to book. But the good thing is that records are there. Judges have been tried by the National Judicial Council. Judges have actually been prosecuted by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. So it is not altogether a situation where those who want to subvert the system are always having their way. The call should be, and I appreciate the fact that Olanipekun SAN pointed the fact that there is a danger in Section 65, but however, the most important thing about that call is that for a call for vigilance on the part of the candidates, on the part of the agents of the candidate, and on the part of those who have been saddled with responsibility by INEC to live according to the trust that has been imposed on them by being appointed as presiding officers and returning officers. In this case, I don't think in any way, with most due respect and all humility, that Section 65 poses any problem at this time to the electoral system.
Okay, well, thank you for really thoroughly explaining that. And of course, in a political process and in elections, like you said, the inevitability of corruption and chaos and confusion entering is just part and parcel of the process. But do you, in your opinion, think that anything more can be done in order to assess or incentivize some of these actors to not go the corrupt way? And I'm talking about the INEC officials, the returning INEC officials. I mean, apart from prayer and good wishes and just hoping that things, is there any physical or is there any way to incentivize them to play on the right side?
It is because you have used the word incentive. Rather, the truth about it is that certain national assignments are not supposed to be prebendal. We have become too materialistic in our country. We measure everything with the amount of money that we get. What's the need for me? The truth about it is that it's a mark of honor to be a judge. It's a mark of honor to be a presiding officer. It's a mark of honor to be recognized as a man of impeccable character and high integrity, to be appointed as a returning officer. That suffices. You are supposed to expect mere stipend to just keep you, going. You are giving all the policemen security, you're giving logistics to ensure that the job is done. What more do you need? Those such national assignments are not opportunities, are not opportunities, I would say, for persons to enrich themselves in any way. So that's the reason why the Independent National Electoral Commission, particularly the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, goes out of his way to ensure that they pick men of integrity to man this ad hoc position that INEC advertises, or for them to be appointed to do this national assignment. This country belongs to all of us. We can assume that everything we do is to find money. How can a professor, for example, be appointed as a returning officer and he will be looking out for the highest bidder to pay him to sell his conscience? That is unthinkable. Such a person should be stripped of his professorship and be sent to prison. And I'm very happy that that was what happened in the case of Professor Peter Ogban, even though he's on appeal. But I very much doubt that he will come out of it clean when the court of first instance has convicted him, and when in fact he at a point in time acknowledged to actually cooking figures in favor of a particular candidate. To talk about incentives, do you now want much of the budget of INEC to be paid to individuals who are on a national assignment to salvage their country? For goodness sake, it's supposed to be a simple opportunity to serve this country. That should be the message we preach, and that should be enough motivation to do the right thing, and not necessarily to be paid so much, not to be, so that the politician cannot buy you over. I mean, that should be a shame that any professor, any person that is supposedly of high integrity can actually be named. A prize can be named. A prize tag can be named after him. That shouldn't really be.
Now, Mr. Tietie, having raised his concern, Mr. Wale Olanipekun SAN, he says he's asking the National Assembly to expunge the provision of INEC being able to review its decision within 7 days. But do you see the National Assembly heeding this advice, especially when it's just few weeks to the presidential election?
With much respect to the learned senior advocate, the answer is no. And it's unthinkable. And he knows better that the National Assembly cannot even contemplate it. The government of Nigeria cannot do so. I had cited the provisions of Article 2 of the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance. You cannot, as any member state of ECOWAS, tinker with your electoral act or regulations within 6 months to the election. We're talking about 35 days. The National Assembly cannot do so. And again, it is not altogether bad when you consider Section 65. And INEC must have certain amount of discretionary power to be able to determine electoral standards in this country. You don't strip it of such powers to make immediate determinations as to whether a ballot paper is rejected or it's marked or unmarked, as to whether certain candidate is returned or certain amount of votes should be recognized as the valid votes. You cannot strip an independent, impartial body like INEC of such powers. It should remain. It should not be contemplated. First and foremost, by our obligations as a country under international law, we cannot do that. And again, looking at the real value of Section 65 to the polity, to the electoral process, it shouldn't even be removed. Why should it be contemplated that it should be removed, that those who run the system, discretion entirely should be taken away from them? No, the whole body of administrative law, the way it is that government officials operate government with much of the application of discretion. You can't take away discretion from INEC. It should remain. It should not be contemplated that even to be amended even after the elections.
Well, Frank Tietie, a very spirited response. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this afternoon. Always great to have you and your analysis.